taking a merry break on my podcast. So today we are in the nitty gritty of it, my friends. We are doing a series called The Evolution of Norma Jean into Marilyn Monroe. And with this, we are actually talking about Norma Jean's life, Marilyn's life. She is now transitioned fully into Marilyn Monroe, and we are going to dive into her life and her relationships. And it, my friends, is a ride. Now, just to give you some background, I want to remind you that Norma Jean was 16 years old when she first got married. She married James Daugherty. He was a classmate at Van Nuys High School in 1940. He was 21, she was 16, so 5 years difference. But, for that time, it was a little audacious that they were that far apart. Their relationship actually began to disintegrate when Daugherty actually joined the Merchant Marines. And she actually began modeling because, as a reminder to a previous episode, I believe I spoke about it on the first episode, he got taken to the South Pacific, of course, and she ended up moving in with his mom and dad. That's when she was working at the radio plane company. And that's when Dan Converse was doing the follow-up piece on the way, kind of a morale boosting photo, if you will, editorial. And that's when he spotted her, and the rest was history. James had even said that if he hadn't gone into Merchant Marines during World War II, he believed that she would still be Mrs. Daugherty today. That's what he actually told People magazine in 1976. Now, interesting as well, in the 80s, he was also asked, what was it like to live with Marilyn Monroe, love Marilyn Monroe, be married to Marilyn Monroe? And he said, I didn't love her. I didn't know Marilyn. And who I fell in love with was Norma Jean. And he truly, truly did love her. In the end, Norma ends up writing a letter to him, a rather crass letter, because she was already determined to make it as a model and go from there. And as we know, her tenacity, her spunk, there was no stopping Marilyn Monroe. When she decided she wanted to do something, she was in the game. So she wrote a letter, saying that she'd fallen out of love with him. And he even replied back saying, basically, well, let's wait till I get home. Let's try and work things out. And she decided that her career at that point was more important to her at that time than a relationship with him. So we move on. Now, the next one is someone she had a short-term relationship with. And as I go through and kind of talk about all these, there are a lot of people that she is rumored to have been with, or they came out in later years saying, oh, there was a relationship, but there was no profound proof. I am only talking about the ones that I know actually happened. If someone out there is listening and known, it is very possible, because this was not your average girl. This was Marilyn Monroe. And so Eli Kazan is the next up on her list of relationships. And he was one of Hollywood's all-time great directors. Admitted he had an affair with her at a young age while he was actually married to the playwright Molly Thatcher. And in some unearthed private letters between him and Molly, he confessed to sleeping with the actress, saying, "I'm not sorry for it." And he even added, "I'm not ashamed at all, not a damn bit. And having been attracted to her, she is nothing like what she appears to be now, or even appears to have turned into now. She was a little stray cat when I knew her." Now, Kazan was a close friend of Marilyn's future husband, and we're going to get there, Arthur Miller, and also referred to DiMaggio in his letters to Thatcher, saying the ball player beat up Monroe several times. Now, she was like a good double play combination. The baseball great Joe DiMaggio is who we're talking about next. And they'd actually dated for a couple of years. And it was known as the American Dream. You had Marilyn Monroe, and then you had an all-star, just top of his game, of his era, baseball player, and the media loved it. So 6 months into DiMaggio's retirement, this is then she would have been 26 years old. DiMaggio told a friend, after he and Marilyn were introduced on a blind date, this is in 1952, that there was a beautiful girl that he couldn't stop thinking about. And that's when they went on the date. In fact, the biographer Donald Spoto said, as a beautiful blonde showgirl who made double as a devoted mother and a homemaker. So Marilyn, also, she longed for a home and children, and she was actually surprised by this baseball player. She had expected a flashy New York sports type, and instead she met this reserved guy who didn't make a pass at her right away. And he treated me like something special, is what she said. So, as a reminder, married on January 14th, that was 1954, in a quiet ceremony at City Hall in his native San Francisco, California. But he was very, very jealous. He was very abusive, both verbally and physically, many times. So problems begin to arise with DiMaggio. He was accustomed to being the biggest star and in the room, and he actually became bothered by his wife's skyrocketing fame. He didn't know how to handle it. So the couple was only married for 9 months. They actually divorced that October. And Marilyn later said, in an infamous billowing skirt scene from the 7-Year Itch, was the final point of contention. He said that exposing my legs and thighs, even my crotch, that was the last straw. Now, they did remain close friends, and she even was very good friends with his son as well, from a previous marriage, and always stayed in contact. Even when they were going through their divorce, which is really interesting, they still were dating a little bit. But that's also when she was dating Marlon Brando and started to catch the eye of Arthur Miller. So she had several relationships going in this time. But yeah, they remained close friends. And even 20 years after Marilyn Monroe's death, DiMaggio sent roses to her grave 3 times each week. He really did love her. Now, I will tell you, though, one of the most unforgettable moments in Hollywood history actually involved Frank Sinatra, Marilyn Monroe, and Joe DiMaggio. So this is when DiMaggio became so obsessed with, at this time, it was an estranged wife. The divorce was not finalized yet. That he had found out from an investigator that Marilyn was currently with a lover. And Sinatra actually decided to break into his apartment to catch Marilyn in the act of cheating. So it's Joe DiMaggio and it's Frank Sinatra and a baseball bat. And this is fact. This happened. And Sinatra breaks down the door with a baseball bat, and they were ready to beat the holy crap out of her. And guess what? It was the wrong raid. They accidentally went to the wrong apartment. And it's still been coined as the wrong door raid to this day and is still remembered decades later. Now, perhaps the two most famous of their generation was, again at this time, Marilyn is seeing Brando and were rumored to have briefly dated in 1955. Now, after her divorce from DiMaggio and before her relationship with Miller. Now, Brando escorted Marilyn to the premiere of The Rose Tattoo, and the two actually remained friendly until the end of Marilyn would later say it was love at first sight when she met the author and playwright in 1950 on the set of As Young as You Feel. So the duo did not reconnect until 1955, and after she had divorced DiMaggio and moved from Hollywood to New York City, they actually began secretly dating and were married in 1956. So at first, Marilyn flourished away from Hollywood in her more normal life, and she began cooking, cleaning, taking care of Miller's children. Now remember, he's still married. He hadn't gotten divorced. So they started in as an affair. But when Marilyn went back to work on The Misfits, written by Miller, their relationship actually began to crumble. Now, Marilyn's drug addiction, of course, caused problems on the set and at home. And shortly before the film's premiere in 1961, she and Miller divorced after 5 years of marriage. And just 19 months later, Marilyn would fatally overdose. Now, I will tell you as well, and this is interesting, is that in that mix of time, Marilyn also dated Frank Sinatra. So even though he had came earlier in her life with a baseball bat to beat her up, they still had a connection, which I find rather odd, but they did. And that's kind of her in with the Rat Pack. And we'll get more into that because all of them definitely had a connection there. So the extent of the relationship with Sinatra, they briefly dated after her divorce from Arthur Miller. So after her split from the playwright, Marilyn stayed at the crooner's house for a time after moving back to Los Angeles. Now, the romance cooled off by 1961, and when Sinatra actually proposed to Juliet Prowse, but the two actually ended up remaining friends until her death. So undoubtedly, let's get to the juice. We're going to talk about JFK and Robert Kennedy. And I will tell you, in the end, really only the three of them are going to know the absolute truth. Rumors take over the internet with this. I have absolutely researched my heart out and believe everything I found is true as I can find. And if you're out there and want to comment, help me because, I want to do this justice. But I definitely, just on a personal level, believe that there was definitely a small affair with both. And in my research, in my findings, undoubtedly the extent of the relationship will never be known. But it is alleged that JFK, so John F. Kennedy was first in the relationship status between the Kennedy brothers. And this would have been March 1962. So Kennedy was staying at Bing Crosby's home, and the White House switchboard noted a number of calls from Marilyn Monroe. Now, this is fact. This is in 1962. And Marilyn, of course, famously sang Happy Birthday to the President. That was, seductively sang, as we all know. Happy birthday. And that was May 19th, 1962. It was actually 10 days before his actual birthday, and it was at a celebration of his 45th birthday party. So this is where it starts to go down the rabbit hole, and you're going to start hearing people I haven't mentioned yet, that there's a web leading up to her death. And again, this is where the conspiracy theories really roll. And by all means, I don't want to try to change your opinion on anything. I'm going to give you the facts I found. And I'm also going to tell you my opinion, which could be right, could be wrong, and could be anywhere in between. But Kennedy, this is JFK we're talking about, was introduced to Marilyn in February of 1962, when his brother-in-law, British actor Peter Lawford, invited Marilyn to a dinner party in New York that was being held to honor JFK. So Marilyn had actually met Kennedy twice before, but very briefly each time. Although dinner was at 8, Marilyn was notoriously late for everything. And the fact that she was going to attend a dinner with the President of the United States, waiting did not improve her lack of punctuality. Let's just put it that way. So she eventually arrived more than an hour late for the president. And Lawford's business partner, Mitt Evans, later recalled that when she walked in, it was like the parting of the Red Sea, that there were about 25 people in there, and the crowd divided into halves as she walked through the room. And actress Arlene Dahl was also at the party, and as she recalled, Marilyn walked in and everything stopped. Everyone stopped. It was magical, really. I've never seen anyone stop a room like that. The president turned around, and you could see that he was immediately attracted to her. "Finally, you're here," he said with a big smile. "There are some people here who are dying to meet you." Then she was descended upon, and people just wanted to stand near her, smell her fragrance, breathe the same air. And according to other reports, Kennedy actually took Marilyn's arm and they went to the table, giving Evans a wry little smile and a wink. So, Kennedy later asked Marilyn for her phone number, called her the next day. In the call, Kennedy is alleged to have told Marilyn that he was going to be in Palm Springs on March the 24th, and he asked if she would meet him there, adding, "Jackie won't be there." And that was recorded. So that part is definitely true. Now, Philip Watson is a former Los Angeles County assessor, and he stated that he was present when Marilyn met Kennedy on March the 24th at Bing Crosby's Spanish-style home in Palm Springs. And according to him, Marilyn was calm and relaxed and was wearing kind of a robe thing, was what Watson added. There was no question in my mind that Marilyn and the president were together. They were having a good time. She'd had a lot to drink. It was obvious they were intimate and that they were staying there together for the night. Now, according to other reports, the tryst was viewed differently by the two main subjects. Marilyn became obsessed with JFK at this point, while JFK simply just looked upon their encounter as another conquest. So according to Kennedy's good friend, Florida Democrat Senator George Smathers, Jack was pretty much done with her after Palm Springs. So JFK told me that they were talking And he happened to say something to her like, "You're not really first lady material anyway, Marilyn." And he said it really stuck in her craw. I mean, she didn't like hearing that. And I think he only saw her one more time. And that was when she came into Washington unexpectedly. And we, or he and I, a few others, took her sailing on a motorboat down the Potomac River. They got back about 11:30 at night. She didn't stay at the White House. She stayed somewhere else. There was no panky, but hanky panky between them, at least that night. I know because I asked him the next day, and he would have happily have told me if he had been with Marilyn. Um, but anyway, Jackie knew about that trip. And in fact, we were dancing at a White House ball, and she said to me, "Don't think I'm naive about what you and Jack are doing with all those pretty girls like Marilyn." Sailing on the Potomac under the moonlight. She was accustomed to Kennedy's indiscretions, uh, but this one really bothered her. She knew what she'd heard and read, that Marilyn was a troubled woman. And it wasn't so much that she was angry about it, more that she was just disgusted. And a Secret Service agent later stated, "We all knew about the weekend. It wasn't until she and the president were both dead that people started talking about an affair." And trust me, no one was saying anything about an affair in 1962. What we knew was that JFK and Marilyn had sex at Bing Crosby's, and that's it. We didn't think it was a big deal. He had sex with a lot of women. She was just one of many, and it wasn't that noteworthy. So if there was more to it between them, they somehow managed to keep it from us. And I don't think you can keep something like that from the Secret Service. So the weekend in Palm Springs developed into an obsession for Marilyn, who desperately wanted to see Kennedy again. Now, her publicist, Rupert Allen, actually described her as being fixated on the president. It started to become unclear as to what was going on between them, even though I thought it wasn't much. She was acting like she wanted more, though. Another Secret Service agent said she was calling him a lot, but she wanted to see him, and everyone knew it. But feelings weren't mutual, and Kennedy refused to return the phone calls. So after the incident in May, in which Marilyn sings "Happy Birthday" to the president, or to Mr. President, uh, at the Madison Square Gardens in a skin-tight sequence gown, uh, First Lady Jackie Kennedy told her husband that she was deeply unhappy about the event. And according to author Seymour Hersh, she even threatened to file for divorce immediately before the next presidential campaign, something that would have hamstrung his chances of being reelected. So George Smathers said Jack was already done with Marilyn anyway, that time, and he had this other girl named Mary Meyer, and he was playing around with. His view of Marilyn was that she was a very sweet girl, but to him, sweet girls were a dime a dozen, and Marilyn was trouble. She began to ask for opportunities to come to Washington, to the White House, that sort of thing. But he told Jackie, "Look, it really is over. It was nothing anyway. Jack told me it's not worth it, George. I have a free ride here with Jackie. She gives me great latitude. So if this one is going to be an issue for her and cause me problems with respect to her dealing with the other women, then fine. I can live without this. No problem. So let's just end it with Marilyn before it's too late." So I called someone I knew, a friend of Marilyn's I could trust, and said, "I need you to put a bridle on Marilyn's mouth and stop her from talking so much about what's going on with Jack. It's starting to get around too much." That's all I did to end things. My little contribution, but I know what Jack did. He stopped taking her calls, if he ever took any. And as far as he was concerned, he was done with her. But Marilyn, well, she wouldn't be so easily got rid of. Let's put it that way. So, publicist Rupert Allen adds if Kennedy had actually handled Marilyn differently, things might have not have turned out so badly. But just ducking her as he did, not good. So, Kennedy never personally told Marilyn that their fling was over. Instead, he had his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, tell her that she was not going to call the White House again. Now, whether it was rejection by JFK or some other cause, by 1962, the year that she died, Marilyn was heavily dependent now on prescription drugs and alcohol, even to control her emotional instability. On August the 5th, 1962, at 4:25 a.m., LAPD Sergeant Jack Clemens, and we will hear this name again, and we're going to go there, Anne Monroe's psychiatrist, said that Marilyn was found dead at her home at 12305 Fifth Helena Drive in Brentwood, Los Angeles, California, and she was 36 years old. Now, according to Kennedy biographer Richard Reeves, the logistics of Kennedy's liaisons required secrecy and devotion were in the annals of the energetic service demanded by successful politicians. So Kennedy reportedly believed that his friendly relationship with members of the press would help protect him from revelations about his sex life. During his lifetime, he was correct about this assumption. So those who were present at JFK's 45th birthday party in 1962, which Monroe sang happy birthday, have said that the actress went after Bobby Kennedy. So now we're to Bobby Kennedy, right in front of his wife, Ethel. And there are witnesses to this. Sign up to Irish Central's newsletter. They have a lot of great information on this as well. I would highly recommend that when you're looking. It's just interesting to see that viewpoint, just throwing that out there. But she actually literally pinned him against the wall. This is Marilyn to Bobby while Ethel is there. And she had him trapped, claimed Polster Lohuris. Now, Ethel was disgusted. When she got him home, she said, "That is the most disgusting thing that I have ever seen." The letter was auctioned along with some other personal items belonging to Marilyn in Beverly Hills, California on November 17th, 2016. The Daily Mail reports there's always speculation about her relationship with the Kennedys, and this speaks to the fact that there was in fact a relationship between Robert Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe, said Martin Nolan, and he's the executive director of Julian's Auctions. Now, other items that were up for auction in 2026 included a receipt from a bottle of champagne. That was Marilyn's 1947 contract with 20th Century Fox, and a recipe for stuffing jotted down on a slip of paper with an insurance company's letterhead. Also up for sale was her final checkbook, which shows payments to the window cleaner, her maid, and the New York Telephone Company, and $200 to herself, marked as cash for trips. Marilyn kept everything. She was a hoarder, said Nolan. She actually bought a pound of butter. She bought a bottle of tonic water. She kept the recipe. It's incredible. We have a pair of strapped sandals that she wore when she was Norma Jean, probably 1943 to 1945, somewhere in there. And all that money she made and how famous she became, and she still kept those. The auction also had items for sale that the public had never seen before, including first edition hand-bound 1957 volume of Monroe's third husband, Arthur Miller's plays dedicated to her. So Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a bombshell known for her ditzy blonde persona and her tumultuous love life. She was also, for 10 years, a possible subservient person with communist ties, according to the FBI, they actually kept tabs on the actress and her whereabouts with the help of secret informants, press reports, and anonymous letters sent to agents. Now, this, of course, you guys have to remember, is the era of McCarthyism. And the Soviet Union was expanding into Eastern Europe, heightening the Cold War. There were tensions between the US and the USSR. Anyone suspected of harboring communist sympathies was actually vulnerable to falling under the watchful eye of the FBI and the House Committee on Un-American Activities, charged with rooting out Soviet spies in the US. Now, the federal government finally released the FBI papers related to Marilyn in 2012. And in response to an FOIA request by the Associated Press. Now, on that, timestamps on the document start around 1955, the year she began dating the suspected commie and playwright Arthur Miller. So by the early 1960s, the Bureau actually made it clear that Marilyn wasn't working with the Communist Party USA. Subject's views are very positively and consciously leftist, I should say. And if she is being actively used by the Community Party, it was not general knowledge among those working with the movement in Los Angeles. One agent said in a letter to the FBI director at the time, J. Edgar Hoover. So that didn't stop the FBI from continuing to investigate Marilyn. The most recent documents in the trove are actually dated in 1973, more than a decade after her death. And the FBI's fascination with Marilyn, her whereabouts, her relationships, her political affiliation, was all being watched and reported. Now, the reports were filed with secondhand and third-hand accounts, anonymous tips, press clippings from dubious newspapers, and unidentified sources. So one would think the backing of the federal government would come with some special insight, but it seems like the agents that were working on Marilyn's case often relied on the same media reports everyone else was reading. Among the newspapers cited in the files are the Washington Star, the Communist Party USA's, the Daily Worker, and the New York Post. Arthur Miller was the big prize. So many of the documents are not even about Marilyn herself, but about Arthur Miller. And the New York City playwright who wrote 1953's The Crucible, a thinly veiled allegory, I guess you would call it, for McCarthyism, is in fact the FBI only became interested in Marilyn after her relationship with Miller blossomed in 1955. So they started following her right after he gets involved with Arthur Miller. A retired UCLA history professor, Lois Banner, author of Marilyn, The Passion and the Paradox, told the Daily Beast she's married to this person they think is proto-communist. And a document dated June the 13th, 1956, actually describes how Miller attended a Communist Party seminar for writers in the fall of 1946. Now, the same document cites a report from the Communist Daily Worker newspaper claiming that Miller issued an angry retort to the New York City Youth Board for bowing to a red baiting attack when it shelved his script for a planned film about juvenile delinquency in New York City. And another news clip actually claimed Miller had turned down a free trip to Moscow from a Soviet official. So all of this laid the groundwork for the House of Representatives' prosecution of Miller, who was subpoenaed by the House of the Un-American Activities Committee after he tried to renew his passport in 1956. So the writer told lawmakers that he had signed appeals and protests issued by Red Front groups in the 1940s. And according to those FBI documents, but he denied being under communist discipline. So when he refused to name other writers who had done the same, a judge held him in contempt of Congress. And according to a 1958 news clip collected by the Bureau, an appeals court ruled that the HUAC chairman failed to make definitely known to Mr. Miller that he was being commended to answer the question and ordered the district court to acquit him. So an FBI field representative receives a long letter in 1964 that Marilyn and then Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy were involved in an affair from late 1961 to early 1962. So Robert Kennedy was deeply involved emotionally with Marilyn Monroe and had repeatedly promised to divorce his wife, the letter reads. So the agent who sent it to the headquarters advises that he does not know the source and cannot evaluate the authenticity of this information. But the notion that Marilyn was involved romantically with both Kennedy and his brother, President John F. Kennedy Jr., is now widely accepted. So a lot of people have testified to this, says Banner, who herself interviewed dozens of people who knew Marilyn personally. Now, Jean Martin, this is interesting, the wife of Dean Martin, who used to attend many of the Kennedy parties, unequivocally confirmed that Marilyn was involved with both brothers. Rumors that the Kennedys were involved in covering up the investigation into Marilyn's death have continued to surface for years. And Brenner says the investigation remains the source of speculation because of the lack of documentation. So they got rid of all the records, she says. And if you go to the police department or the district attorney's office, it's empty. There's nothing there. So the FBI cites an article from the Daily Worker, one of the FBI's favorite sources on commie activity, and reportedly that Monroe applied for a visa to visit the Soviet Union, according to Dr. Carlton Smith. Now, he is the head of advisory art committee of the National Art Foundation, who said it was all part of a cultural exchange program. The article quoted Marilyn as saying, "I am looking forward to visiting Russia and other countries. I have not applied for a Soviet visa, but there is a possibility I may visit there sometime in the future." So in 1955, J. Edgar Hoover wrote a letter to the Department of State saying that an informant had told him that the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. got a letter from Marilyn Monroe's manager requesting an application for a visa to visit the USSR. The letter was allegedly received on August the 12th, 1955, and at that time, the Soviet embassy said the visa request was under consideration. So Marilyn's trips to Mexico, where she allegedly mingled with members of the American Communist Group in Mexico, also known as the ACGM, well, there she reportedly spent a lot of time with Frederick Vanderbilt Field. He was a descendant of the railroad tycoon Cornelius Vanderbilt, known for his radical leftist policies and politics. And he was actually living in exile in Mexico, where Marilyn visited him and became enamored with him. So according to the FBI, she arrived in Mexico on February the 19th, 1962. Now, she's no longer with Miller, but still influenced by him and his politics. So her entry into the country was reportedly arranged by Frank Sinatra. And one source actually advised that during the course of the visit, a mutual infatuation arose between the subject and Frederick. And this situation actually caused considerable dismay among Marilyn's entourage and also among the ACGM, the report states. Now, the FBI names Eunice Murray, and this is Monroe's housekeeper, and we are going to delve into this deep into another episode, but The author actually tells the Daily Beast that Murray, identified as Eunice Churchill in the FBI records, was paired up with Marilyn by the actress's psychiatrist, Ralph Greenson. So she was a good friend of Marilyn, she says, and had leftist ties of her own. So the FBI is not completely trustworthy, Banner says, and they sometimes make things up. But either way, according to the Bureau, Churchill said that Marilyn felt like a negated sex symbol. And after Miller's third marriage that year, and that a lot of leftists rubbed off from Miller. And it's just very strange that with this, and even in a memo to J. Edgar Hoover dated February 15th, 1965, there was a special agent note that an informant had seen a motion picture which depicted deceased actress Marilyn Monroe committing a perverted act upon an unknown male. Now, the person in possession of this supposed sex tape claimed that Marilyn's ex-husband, Joe DiMaggio, offered him $25,000 for the film. And even a follow-up memo appeared to suggest that the FBI and its informants, acquainted with the Italian hoodlum element, have no knowledge of such a video. So that's a lot. And like I said, Marilyn, she, I feel like, was very much a lost soul. When it came to her love life, I always think of the song Candle in the Wind by Elton John. By the way, I love it. And it's true. She was always looking for more, wanting more. And it was hard. And it's a road that I don't know if she really ever was at peace with. As we dive into the next episode, we are going to actually start the countdown. I'm going to start like months before her life. I'm going to go into a timeline, and then we're going to get into the day of her death and the cover up thereafter. So it's getting good, people. Thank you so much for always being in my tribe. Remember to always be kind with people in this world. Let's make a difference, because we never know what anyone is going through. So let's pay it forward. Thank you so much for being here today and listening to me, and all of you have a great evening. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.